everybody really felt they were there, you know, which was a great experience. I went to college to go and study literature, which is not the obvious first choice for becoming a production designer. But it was, you know, at school I was really good at literature, and I was really good at art. And the first thing that happened to me when I went to college is I ran into the theatre crowd, and I just ran with them at college, and it's kind of all I did. I designed sets there, which I'd never done before. I didn't even know, you know, that was a thing. I directed plays. I was in plays, not very well, I spent 3 years doing that. At the end, in the middle of my second year at college, I was at a party and I met somebody, I was introduced to somebody who said, "Oh, I'm a theatre designer." I said, "Oh, that's brilliant. And what do you do for a living though?" And he laughed and said, "No, this is my job." And I couldn't believe it. It was like, you know, the skies opened and the choir of angels came out, and I was like, this is it. You know, this covers both the bases. It's like I love to draw, and I also really enjoy interpreting text. So, which is a useful part of having a film script. So that was it. I just decided that, you know, set design, that's what I'm going to do. So I dug into it and I found out where I could go to college. Ended up then going to art school to study theatre design, which is sort of, you know, the poor cousin of film design, just in the sense the budgets aren't as big. But and it's a different kind of discipline. But I studied that. I loved it. I thought that was everything I wanted to do. I worked as a theatre designer for a number of years. But I made the mistake while I was at art school of making a short film, and as part of my graduation thing. And it was a dance film. It was incredibly arty. You'll never find it on YouTube. And it was, it was very sort of successful for launching me into doing films. Sort of, I used to do about one a year, sort of like an interesting TV drama every year. I used to go off and design it, and but it was still very much kind of in the, you know, it was like the sort of merry band philosophy of design. You know, there'd just be a crowd of us, and we'd build the sets and paint them, and, you know, we did everything. I didn't really know much about film design, but as I progressed in my theatre career, I started to feel I really wanted to be working on a bigger canvas. So there came a point where I came to a crossroads, and I had a choice whether to really commit to carrying on with theatre or going into film. I'd love to have done both of them, but the calendars for both don't fit at all. You know, theatre's all about, oh, come, you know, let's do a show next year, and theatre's all about you start Monday. So, anyways, I left the theatre career behind and spent 6 months very nervously waiting by the phone and just calling up, you know, designers and got my first job as an art director. And mostly what I was doing was designing sets. And then from there, that was my entree into the film business. So, and the thing about the film business, again, which I'll touch on in this, is that you can go to college, you can go to film school, you can learn all sorts of stuff. You don't really start learning about film making until you're working professionally on films. And when you are, you learn it quick. And I got my first gig as an art director. It was a vertical learning curve. I had a construction manager who just had no time for me because I was so green and knew nothing, and he was always screaming at me all the things I got wrong. And But I got through it, and I had other people who were fantastic mentors who picked me up and carried me along and looked after me and explained things to me. And once you get that foot in the door, that's what happens. And then you just ask a lot of questions, and you learn on the way, and you never stop learning. I mean, I've never worked on a production where I haven't learned, some important new aspect of filmmaking. Even if it's just sort of going deeper into something. But every show also has different challenges as well. So I've never ever stopped learning, and that's one of the things I love about doing this. Is it's kind of never dull. Every career relationships are important. They're absolutely crucial in the film industry, and you make relationships, and they tend to be very tight ones, and they're what propels your career, the people you work with, they recommend you for other jobs, and if you've done a good job on one show, people will recognize it, and they put you forward for another job, or producers you've worked with will hire you again. And if you establish a relationship with a director, this is when you get to the level of being a production designer, you're establishing relationships with directors and producers, but directors especially. When I was working in theatre, we always used to call the relationship you had with the director a marriage. Which is, and I've never heard it in the film industry, but it's something I took with me, because it is, in the sense that it's a very active relationship, and it changes over time, and there's always there's a harmony, and there's also a creative tension where you're and they're all important in order to make to make a better film. You need to be able to kind of push back on ideas and try out new things and all of that, as well as ride the horse in the direction it's going, as they say, and go along with the vision that of the whole project. So I think first it's probably good to ask what is art direction. And there's an old joke that I think illustrates it, which goes, how many art directors does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is, well, does it have to be a light bulb? Could be a really cool candle fitting. What does that tell us about art directors? It tells us that art directors are solely concerned with the visual look of a film, and constantly questioning what those details should be and whether they're the right details to tell the story of the movie. Just imagine, there's people that do that for a living. By the way, I think the best of those jokes is, how many celebrities does it take to change a light bulb? Just one. You give it to the celebrity, and the world revolves around them. So, now when I tell people I design sets for movies, I'm often met with bafflement. People are kind of like, somebody actually does that? I mean, I certainly was when I met that theatre designer. I was like, I had no idea that was an actual job. But just think about it. In a movie, everything you see in the movie that's photographed on the screen has been designed, it's been chosen, it's been constructed, it's been painted, it's been decorated, it's been dressed with furniture and all kinds of details and graphics and all sorts of things by a big team of people. Every single one of those people is a specialist. So, and here's an example of it. This was from a movie I did a while ago now, but called Pandorum. And you can just see the level of the detail in the set. But every single one of these trunks had graphics that were specifically designed. in that movie, I got the graphic designers to design a special alphabet. We designed our own typeface for the spaceship. It didn't exist anywhere because we wanted something that was kind of unique, and we based it on a Korean script. So it's that level of detail that goes into every image that you see on a movie set. Without set design, there wouldn't be anything to shoot, and movies would probably look like this, or maybe this. Nothing to shoot. So the importance of set design lies, well, it actually lies in the origins of what we now call production design, just to make things more confusing. The origins of that are that originally production designers, like myself, were always known as art directors until the 1939 production of The Wizard of Oz. And the producer, Louis B. Mayer, thought that the design of the movie was so central to the making of the movie that he gave the title to the legendary. It was a legendary designer, Hollywood designer called Cedric Gibbons. He gave him the title Production Designer, and it's been that ever since. So you can thank The Wizard of Oz. And I think you'll agree that if you've seen The Wizard of Oz, the production design in it is absolutely central to the whole movie. So what made Cedric Gibbons' work, along with like a whole unsung legion of art directors, so important to The Wizard of Oz? It's a one-word answer: storytelling. Perhaps not the answer you're expecting to hear, but that is what art direction is all about: visual storytelling. Whether it's from the intergalactic world of Star Wars and the story behind that, or the London of 1890s in Sherlock Holmes, or the narrow alleyway from the housekeepers in Parasite. Three really different settings, but each one of them tells their own story. By the way, this alleyway, which looks like a street in maybe Seoul, in Korea, this is in fact a set that was built in a huge tank because they had to flood it later. And so and again, you can see the level of detail that's gone into it to bring it to life and to make you really believe this is a real place that, in the story. So designers and set designers, they create the world of the story and they frame the characters to show who they are, show their circumstances, and also to underscore the mood of the scene. And all of that is through visual storytelling. So with that in mind, shall we have a look at those empty images again? So it's this first one is actually full of information. It's like an architect's plan of the town on the ground. The houses are marked out on the floor. It tells you the director doesn't want the art direction to distract you from the story he's telling. But look at how it creeps in anyhow. The simple wood church steeple tells you this is quite a modest town. It looks out of date. It could be from another period. This is actually from a movie called Dogville, directed by Lars von Trier. And it was made under the rules of a Danish film movement that he started called Dogma. It called for a kind of purity in filmmaking. No sets, no movie lights, nothing artificial to distract you from the storytelling. But even here, the visual storytelling couldn't be avoided. There are sets. There are actually movie lights as well, so he's breaking all his own rules. What about this empty landscape here? This is actually from, well, actually, let's look at the image first. And what it tells us. So look at this sign. It's all weathered and broken, and so we guess the railway line is probably disused. That tiny detail emphasizes the isolation and the remoteness of this place. But someone chose to put that there. They had it made. A painter painted it to make it look old. And then also look at how the road and the railway make a very pleasing triangle there in the frame. So that's not an accident. An art director chose that spot deliberately. This is from the 1967 thriller In Cold Blood. And all these details are used to show the mood of the scene. Interestingly, when I was at theatre design school, show, don't tell, was one of the major takeaways I took from college. And the other one was simple, 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 bold, bold, bold. But that's a different story. But that's definitely served in my career as a film designer. But how do designers and art directors show the story and the characters? This is an image from Sherlock Holmes' Game of Shadows. You may recognize it. I worked on it. It looks pretty ordinary maybe in a period setting, but this set was very important for the character of Watson and the story. It's actually the only time we see Watson in his own house. So what does it tell us about him? He's quite well off. Look at the very rich wallpaper. If you look at the paneling there, which is actually called linen fold, it's pretty fancy and it's not cheap. The style of the room feels a bit medieval. There's the stone window, there's the stained glass, there's the heraldry. This man admires tradition. The style is actually called arts and crafts, but it was new and fashionable then, so he also likes to be up to date. And check out all of the Victorian technology, the telephone, the typewriter, and in there he's also got an electric lamp. He is what we'd probably call now an early adopter. These are all bang up-to-date things. All of these choices and these details tell the audience, you, subconsciously, what this character is like and who he is. Now, here's another example. This is from a movie I worked on called Tsunami: The Aftermath. Very different challenge here. How do you show a tsunami disaster? After the 2005 Asian tsunami, the waves actually just stripped the landscape bare and either pushed everything inland or sucked it back out to sea. When you went there was nothing to see. So the challenge here was that the film had to show the damage. An empty landscape wouldn't do it. You had to be able to feel what was going on in this place. So you had to register the emotional impact, and that was all through the settings. That's part of the visual storytelling here. So here you see Tim Roth walking through a devastated Thai village. To feel the impact of the waves, I created a sculpture of all of the rubble. You can probably see the way it undulates like waves. This was just one of 4 sets of devastation. This one was unique in the form of being, in the form of waves. And the idea is that I don't want you to notice that. I don't want you to come away going, oh, look at that, look, it looks like waves. But I want you to subconsciously feel that in the scene, in the setting. And it was a set designer who drew that so that form could be built. Well, speaking of set designers, before we go further, let's look at the skills that are needed in the arts department and then the people who carry them out. In this movie, like I say, there were 4 sets of devastation. Now, if I'd gone with reality and the sort of documentary approach to it, we would have had 4 scenes on empty beaches. It's the emptiness that told the story. But we cut from Tim Roth here to his wife on another beach because they lose each other in the story. You had to, if they had all been empty beaches in the story, you wouldn't have known where each of them were. So it was very important that each one of these 4 areas of devastation in the movie looked very different, markedly different, but still told the story. But also emotionally had the impact about what the scene's actually about. So when Tim Roth is walking through here, he is, it was a while ago, but I think he'd lost his daughter, and the whole purpose of this set is that he is to kind of show his state of shock about what the tsunami had done. And then there was another set that I created that did use the emptiness, but it was in contrast to this. And contrast in set design is extremely important because the eye gets tired very quickly, interestingly, and it's important to show contrast between things, and it's something I use a lot when I'm designing films. So there was another scene where at the hotel, devastated hotel, all the land behind it, absolutely empty, and it was the emptiness that told the story. And it actually told the story of the wife very effectively in a number of scenes about her emotional state. And all of that doesn't replace what the actors are showing in the scene, but it frames it and it underscores it and it makes you feel it more strongly. Ideally, if you've got a good set, if you've got a good scene and a good set, the one amplifies the other. So, and I'll be honest with you, I don't have any problems with changing reality like here if it's going to tell the story better. As long as, I mean, there was no, we didn't kind of usurp the experience of what happened in the Asian tsunami at all. I just tried to amplify it and underscore it for the scenes.
How close did you work with the costume designer? Because I can see the colors of the shirt in the background, they're quite similar.
Yes.
So how close did you work with the costume designer?
Yeah, deliberate. So yeah, no, well spotted. Always work very closely with the costume designer, and it's a kind of mutual thing. There will be some scenes where frequently the costume designer will come to me and say, "Oh, what are the colours on your set?" And then they'll either blend their costumes in, or they will make sure they stand right out, and all of that. But also, very often, we'll have a discussion where they'll say, "Listen, I want this, these characters to wear, these outfits. Let's talk about how we make that work with the set design." And then I'll take the back seat in that and make sure that what I'm doing doesn't, basically supports what the costume design is about, because sometimes the costume design is the thing that underscores the scene. And so yeah, you work very closely with them. I always do anyways, partly because working in theatre I used to design costumes, and once made the mistake of doing it for film, but that way you never get any sleep, so it didn't last very long. But I think it's absolutely crucial that you work together. And interestingly, in this was quite deliberately designed to make him look like part of the, not to sort of stand out from the rest of the thing. Because earlier in the movie, when you saw them all, playing on the beach and everything, they're wearing very loud, solid colours and everything, so that they stand out from the background. And that was, again, a deliberate choice. Before we go further with the talk, let me just walk you through the people who create the sets. Because to create the world of a story, you need a lot of different skills, as I was saying. So the people in the art department end up with a very broad knowledge of many different disciplines. The art department is in many ways kind of the beating heart, creative heart of the movie, in the sense that, I'm not going to overstate this, our importance, but just in the sense that we are at the center of everything that goes on. The art department works with pretty much every department apart from maybe the caterers. So we have to collaborate, obviously, with the with the camera team and make the sets work for that. We even work with the sound team because like a space like this, you can see hard surfaces everywhere. This would be quite a difficult space for sound, for instance. So they quite often ask for soft surfaces, or I'm conscious that I can't design just hard boxes if there's a lot of dialogue going on in a scene. All these little things and then as the show goes on, the stunt teams, and they come in with their fight designs and everything, and we have to incorporate them in our sets, and and hopefully the designs have anticipated a fight scene, so we don't have to do too much work on that. But there's always stuff we have to replace and all of that. So every team we collaborate with. So also, I think everybody in the art department have to be really good collaborators. You have to be able to work really well with other people and respect other people's work, and it's a great kind of give and take. For the kind of the skills that are needed for the people in the art department, there's architecture. Architecture is at the base of, it's the foundation of everything we do. But it's very much skin deep architecture, as I was saying to you about about the surface of everything. It quite often it answers like the aesthetic questions of building design, but it also answers all the requirements of photography and storytelling, but not so much water pipes and electrical outlets and air conditioning. There's an example of of a set design, and again, it's just the whole look of it. This was actually for a burned out house on the Nice Guys. For it, I worked very closely with the painters. Just one second. I worked very closely with the painters on this to come up with a whole new recipe for what burned wood could look like, because I always had a bit of a bugbear about it, because if you really burn wood, all the salts start coming out and they crystallize on the surface. And so when you see it close to camera, it looks amazing if you get real burned wood, but very time consuming to do. So we came up with a whole recipe, the painters, for all the stuff that was close to camera, so we could get that really gnarly texture, and then the rest of it was all painted. Just an illustration of the kind of detail that you want to go into in order to make people really feel that something, feel a set, Quite often we call it the smell of a set, which is quite a good description.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could comment on how do you as a production designer work with the CGI department, and how that relationship kind of works in terms of maybe you building a part of the set and then the background is CGI. If you could maybe comment on that.
CG it's amazing what you can do with it. You can do, I can just create a little bit of foreground, and then we can drop in a whole background. And instead of being in a parking lot at a film studio, suddenly we're in a jungle somewhere with blue screen. But when you have to film sustained scenes in a place, the rule of thumb, and most post-production people will tell you this, is build a set. The actors need something to work with. It's really hard for actors who, to work in a kind of just a green screen environment. And they have to just imagine, there's no smell to it, and they've just got a few props and everything. And it's hard for them to feel it. The other thing as well is that nothing looks as good as the built environment. CG's great, but it's what's really, I think, and again, most always having this conversation on set with post people, they always go, yep, let's have a set that we can shoot and we'll fill in the gaps, or we'll pop in, we'll top it up and everything, but let's have the real thing, because nothing photographs like the real thing. And again, it's something you sort of learn on the way of what works. I mean, again, there's a few things, as you want to make sure your set is tall enough so that the actors, basically the actors' heads don't pop out over it, so we don't have to use green screen, or they don't have to, roto, which means cut round every single frame of their head and everything. It's interesting because on the project I'm working on at the moment, we're following very much that philosophy, and some of the sets, as a consequence, are pretty enormous. But what it means is that because they're such unique kind of looking designs, that they're not things you're going to find walking down around Cape Town. They will be much more credible and believable in this sort of fantasy world than if it was CGI, because there's an element I always think with things that are just, you know, full-blown CG things where there's a great wow factor to it, but you don't feel it. You know, you don't really buy in that, like, oh my God, that's real. You know. Yeah, and then set construction. I think we touched on that in the introduction. Set construction, so that we draw sets that can be built by a very specialised construction team. On the whole, we build in wood. We carve in polystyrene. We mould in resin and fiberglass. We look for light and temporary. We look for flexible and changeable. Because there's incredibly tight time frames on film sets. If you think that on a big film, the main unit crew will cost anywhere between $180,000 to $250,000 a day, and we're talking about like a big Marvel movie. We're talking about the production I'm working on at the moment. If they get held up for half an hour, you can calculate that cost. And so that, so you can imagine tempers run high, if things aren't flexible. And there's also the thing that you want to deliver sets that when a director and a DP walk on, they'll have shortlisted stuff, they'll have an idea what they want to shoot, but always they'll come up with something that happens in front of them. And I think this is when the magic of filmmaking happens, because it's when you're on a set and you suddenly see an opportunity or a possibility, and it's like, oh my God, we could actually, what if we shot here, or we could add a little scene in here, if only that wall wasn't in the way. So, you want the sets to be as flexible as possible to allow people their creativity on set, to allow directors and DPs to get really creative on set. So that's something we look for in set construction. Yeah. This was the set as it came out with my new paint finish. This was I expect a lot of you have seen Alien, the original Alien. This was the original Ridley Scott one. You can see here. This is all wooden construction. All of this set was built with wood forming behind, bit of steel work and everything. Everything on top of that is made from plaster. It was all moulded in plaster. That's the kind of thing we do. And we do it in plaster because, there's two reasons. One is that you can cut it out quite easily. And there are other things you can cut out more easily, but the great thing about plaster is it takes paint amazingly well. You can get beautiful paint finishes on it. You also need an understanding of photography to draw sets that will work for shooting. This is kind of crucial because, as I said before, everything we do is to be photographed. It's not, although we use architecture, we're not architects. We are not interested in, many of the things that architects are interested in creating a building. We're interested in photography. So what that really means is that set designers are masters of illusion. And this is a favorite thing of mine about set design. Can I have the next slide? So you see that amazing view of Mount Rushmore. It's just a painted backing. And the next one. This immense corridor in Star Wars. Can I have the next slide? It's just an illusion. So, a perspective trick. They use this a lot in Star Wars, and they still do, funnily enough. And then just moving on in skills that we need, there's also interior design that we get involved in choosing furnishings and decoration for the sets. This is the subject of a whole other talk. I won't really get into it here, but set designers work very closely with the set decorators. You need to ensure that all the furnishings are going to work well in the space, that there's enough room to put your sofas and your chairs, and it's not all going to back against the wall, but also that you can get a cameraman behind all of that as well to get the shots that you need. Sometimes there'll be a really key piece that the set decorator needs built into a set. So, that all gets incorporated as part of the set design. And so, well, look, before getting into the whole process of set design, I'll just explain some of the various positions in the art department, you may or may not be aware of. First, there is the production designer, that's me, who creates the world of the film. I decide on the style, the design, sketch designs for illustrators, choose locations, oversee the decoration and the set dressing. Then there's art directors. So art directors are in charge of individual sets or blocks of sets. This becomes part of the project management things. And it works differently in different countries, but in general, they will see through the whole process from set drawings through construction and painting. There's, on a bigger film, there's too much for someone like me to be able to get round to and see all the details of construction on and all the drawings and everything on a daily basis. So art directors are absolutely crucial for all of that. And along with set designers, they will draw the main construction drawings for the sets. And generally they will be very experienced set designers. And then set designers, which is what we're talking about, who are the architects of the whole process. And they will take the designer's references, sketches, illustrations, and interpret them to draw the set ready to be built. And these days, everybody uses 3D drawing programs like SketchUp and Vectorworks. Now, there's still instances, even these days, for hand drawing, because that's what we all used to do. It's what I learned to do to start with, was drawing on a drafting table and we all used to work in pencil. There's still a place for that, because if you have an organic set like a cave or something, or like a really wonky old building or something, it can be better to draw it in pencil. In fact, interestingly, one of the sets that I'm building at the moment is this. It's a kind of Indonesian village, we could get so far with CAD, which was just putting it out, doing a layout of everything. But ultimately, for the construction people, I got somebody who knows how to draft in pencil. This is a very simple version of that, just to get the quality of the build and the kind of wonkiness of everything, and get the subtle differences between, and get a feeling between the different huts and everything. Very hard to do in 3D. These are talented artists who create illustrations of the sets or locations. They'll show how they look in the world of the movie. And they not only show the set design, but they also will convey the mood and give an idea for the lighting of the scene. So this was from a movie that never got made, that I was working on, that was, funnily enough, was going to be shot in Cape Town. So I was here for 10 weeks drawing until we got sent home. This was going to be for a movie called Pendragon. And this was a fighting platform. Anyways, beautiful concept drawing, and it gives a wonderful idea. And this is something that set designers would be handed along with, well, if it was me, pencil sketches and everything, in order to start designing the construction drawings. And finally, there's set decorators who choose the furnishings and details to dress the sets so they look real. And along with the art directors, the set decorator is one of the designer's key collaborators. So the work from a brief by the designer and the concept illustrations, but they'll develop their own ideas according to the script as well in the dressing. And as I've explained to you, sometimes that can make a huge difference to what to how the scene is framed. So that's all the people. Everything in a movie starts with the script. Sounds obvious, perhaps, but it's really important to read the script. And when you've read it, read it again. And it's the roadmap. It's got all the clues for the set design. Most basically, it'll tell you where the scene takes place. it might say exterior auto show. And then you'll have to build this. This was from the Nice Guys. It might say interior palace throne room. You'll recognize this from Thor, I expect. Or it might say interior spaceship control room. And this was from Pandorum. Next, the script will tell you what happens in the scene that the set has to frame. Perhaps the most famous example of this is from the script of Ben-Hur. It's a famous classic about Roman chariot racing. It read, exterior Roman arena day. One simple line, the games begin. So, or perhaps it's the line from the 2004 Roland Emmerich film, The Day After Tomorrow. The writer wrote a simple stage direction in the script. Exterior Fifth Avenue, New York City, a ship floats down the street. 6 words, and a huge job for the art department was born. I actually met the writer of that script, and I asked him about that scene because it doesn't play for very long in the movie. And he told me he wrote it just to see how far he could go. And guess what? It stayed in the movie. So to create it, the art department, I was actually working in Montreal at the same time as this was being filmed. The art department had to create, it was a giant miniature. I mean, those buildings are 5 meters high. And also a scale miniature of the ship, which this is, to realize that scene. So I just say to all you aspiring screenwriters out there, be careful what you write. But the script will also tell you the action, where characters fight, perhaps. Here the set design has to incorporate some parts that will break or shatter in action. So this is a still from Alien vs. Predator, where you can see the breakaway walls here, these columns. In fact, I remember this set. All 4 of these columns had to break, but the set still had to be suspended, so it was a bit of engineering just to make sure that the ceiling didn't collapse on it. And in fact, in that movie, in almost every set, there were big breakaway elements. And breakaway elements means that they are made of like a special kind of foam that shatters, when they hit it, that you actually see in action. But then also, the stunt team will need they'll need space for they do wire pulls. So people are attached to wires, so when they get punched, they go flying back and everything. And these can be quite complicated rigs. They'll have wires and pulleys going out of the ceiling and through the walls and everything. And you have to be aware of that when you're designing the set to give them space to do it. Quite often you won't incorporate a ceiling on a big set because of that, and that's where your post-production will come in, because you'll design the ceiling, but the visual effects will put that in afterwards. I mean, sometimes take 2 is not possible straight away. But more often than not, these columns actually, although they broke like that, you could then remove them. You unscrewed the caps and the bases, and you took them out and you put another one in. Took about 30 minutes, but the day was scheduled around that. Sometimes you have to come back the next day, or it gets, things like this would get scheduled to a second unit, which would be a much smaller, much cheaper unit, and they might do one of those and then move on to another little pickup somewhere else, and then come back to it when it had been reset. But resets is something that you always figure into your planning for things. How are we going to do this? Can we get these out and replace it straight away? Sometimes it's not possible. Or maybe there's a horror scene where characters are threatened, and the set design may have to incorporate some kind of dramatic lighting. It might have to incorporate places where people can be chased and that they can hide, and also just the framing in the architecture. So Guillermo del Toro chose to go with a highly Gothic, Victorian Gothic style to this, which immediately tells everybody, this is a horror movie. So it worked really well. Or it might simply be a couple having a tense dinner. I mean, in Orson Welles, I thought just did it beautifully in his masterpiece, Citizen Kane. And he, with his designer Van Ness Polglaze, came up with the idea of a very long table and the two people sitting at either end. It's actually part of a wonderful scene where at the beginning, after their honeymoon, they're sat next to each other and she moves further down until she's at the end, and then suddenly you have the most beautiful image of a marriage gone sour. Very simple, but again, visual storytelling, which is what cinema is all about. So the script also answers much subtler questions, such as what's the mood of the scene? This is in Stanley Kubrick's classic Doctor Strangelove, or How I Stopped Stop Worrying and Learn to Love the Bomb. And the war room set here had to convey the tension of planning the apocalypse, but also the epic scale of a national endeavor. And this was actually one of Ken Adams' designs, and one of his most famous ones, I think. As I said before, he's best known for designing all the early James Bond movies. But this actually, I think, is one of the most iconic sets in movie history. He uses the simple geometry of triangles and circles. And interestingly, this is a set that he came up with from walking in the park. And the much copied circle of lights over the planning table are such an iconic image that, so the story goes, when Ronald Reagan became president, he asked to see the war room from the movie because he believed it actually existed beneath the White House. So, how do you make the leap from script page to set design? So the first part of the process is one of my favorite. It's research. And you do a lot of this in the early stages. And it continues, but particularly at the beginning. So here's a typical board of reference. This was for an apartment set in a movie I designed in 1970s Detroit. To research it, I spent a week in Detroit. I went to lots of photo archives and I went around the city photographing relevant places around the city, all in order to get research from the actual place. And the reason for doing that is because everything in a movie, everything that takes place is entirely specific. It's specific to the story, but specific to the characters. So just for a moment, imagine that you're a character in your own movie, and who doesn't? Your home, your friends, your family, the journeys you take, they're entirely specific to you. The apartment or the house that you live in is not like anyone else's, or perhaps it is. That would be a really interesting story point. Maybe you came by car today. That car is very specific. Your car is not like anyone else's. Maybe it's spotlessly clean. That's part of your character story. It's definitely not part of my character story. Perhaps you came by bicycle. But what kind of bicycle? Is it a broken and bent bicycle like that? That color, that specific design? Is it a fixie, a BMX? All part of your character story. It might even be a bus that you came in today. But it's a very specific bus. And all of these things have been chosen because the point is each one of these details tells a story, and anyone telling your story would need to get them all right for it to be you. So it's the same in a movie story. Whatever the film's about, the set designer has to become a temporary expert in that through picture research. If the setting's modern, mostly this means looking at photography from the period or the place. So this is, again, a typical reference board that I did for Hollywood Boulevard. I mean, this is collated out of hundreds of images that we used to create Hollywood Boulevard in, of all places, Atlanta. This is from The Nice Guys. It took place in Los Angeles in the 1970s. And I needed to know what all these details looked like back then, the architecture, the style, the signage, right down to the details like a door handle or curtain material. And it's actually interesting about the signage because one of the few things that a kind of broad audience will know is wrong, perhaps not architecture, we're not all experts on architecture, but graphics. are incredibly important, particularly if you're doing a period movie, because the one thing that people recognize as being wrong or fake, and they won't know why, is graphics. If you show, if you have a newspaper prop and it hasn't been done quite properly, it's like the spacing between the columns and and the picture's the wrong size and all of these little tiny details, all of you will recognize it as a prop. And you go, oh, that's a prop newspaper, that's not a real one. And you have to, and so there's a lot of, making sure you get all of those details right. And I'm a huge on graphics in the movies and getting those exactly right, and and designing those to be, to look right in the whole picture. But then also, if you're doing a period movie, you'll find your research from other places. It might also be from paintings and etchings of the period, depending on the period that you're doing. This was from Sherlock Holmes to create the Ravache wine cellar set. And the research informs all the details of the film, and set designers have to take all of these details and they incorporate them into the set design. Okay, so this is talk about set design, not production design. At this stage, the designer, if it's me, will hand on sketches of the sets with their own image research. I discuss the floor plan of the set, which, for those of you who don't know, is the shape of the set will take on the stage floor. We've got there you go. Here's a pic of a stage plan. Well, funnily enough, that's from the Ravache cellar that is from Sherlock Holmes that you just saw the research from. I'd also hand on a detailed concept illustration of the set with my own supporting sketches to show how I arrived at the design. And the set designer's job from here is to translate all of that into a concrete 3D design that can be built. This was the floor plan of the Healy apartment. And here's some of the research references. Just very typically, this was the kind of thing I'd hand on. This was Russell Crowe's character set, and it had two layers to think about. As his home, he'd rented an old office above a comedy club on Sunset Strip. So the set designer had to research and draw an office that might have been built a couple of decades earlier, because although it's set in the 70s, you don't want everything to be in the 70s, because that wouldn't look like real life. The space has to feel temporary, but his own character has his stuff layered into it. And also, there was a very complicated fight that happens in there, where they had to kind of go through I had to incorporate all kinds of different openings and things that would break away in there. So that was an added complication too. So after giving a broad brief, I like to work with set designers to solve some of the practical problems and develop the style cues on the set. So initially, it's basic questions. How high is the ceiling? In another Orson Welles movie, The Trial, the opening scene plays in an apartment where the ceiling is very low. Having that low ceiling constantly in shot gives you the right kind of oppressiveness and paranoia to the scenes in the movie, which is about Kafka's trial. The next questions might be just the dimensions that work for the space. Should there be raised areas? Does the set need to go on a raised platform? When you look out of windows onto a scenic backing, you don't want to see the set floor, so you raise the set up onto a platform. So this is from that Tom Cruise movie, Oblivion. You probably recognize it. This one's an interesting one. This whole set was raised up on quite a high platform because all the way around it, there was a 360-degree LED screen that they projected all of the sky onto. So it wasn't a painted backing that didn't move. That's one of the problems with all the old technology. It wasn't a green screen out there that they then filled the background in later. It was, they went to, I think they went to the Alps, or it was the Himalayas, so that they could get above the clouds. And they shot loads of footage at different times of day. And then they projected it 360 degrees around the set. So the backing moved, and also lit the set as well. Just, you know, it was quite extraordinary. And it's what helped to make it such a beautiful set. I mean, it was also a very beautiful design. After creating an initial layout and space, there's stylistic problems to solve. Every detail has to fit the world you're creating. So you talk about details of paneling on doors and windows and the style of all of those. And they've got to be right. And all of these things you learn as you go. There's no single answer to any of these as well. If you think about all the different styles in different countries, there's that to consider. Sometimes it might be specific to like a place, like there's architecture in Cape Town that I don't really see in other parts of the country, for instance. This was from a movie I did, Priest, and it's the future. It's a post-apocalyptic future in a parallel world. People live in fortress cities to protect themselves from vampires that live in the desert and beyond. And this is the city of Jericho that lies outside one of those cities. It's kind of an industrialized cowboy town. This was a mad movie to design. It had so many different stylistic elements that had to be kind of welded together. But it was a lot of fun. So here's the concept. And also a drawing of how, actually, and this answers the post-production thing. This is what we built along the bottom here in the brown, and in the grey is all of the visual effects. So I designed all the visual effects. We gave them all of that as 3D drawings so that they could then take those and render them in post. And here's just just a few of the references from it. So design is really the art of making choices. And this is where the research phase of set design becomes so important. As you collect details and images, you're constantly asking questions. Is this the right style for the story? Does this convey the right mood? Is this the character's taste? Quite often you will make up backstories for characters if they're not in the story in order to be able to answer those questions. And you'll discuss them with the director or the showrunners if you're working on episodic and just to make sure that that story is correct. And once you've got that, you can start, you have a story in which to help you make choices. So here the choices were made from Rust Belt towns in the US and complex pipes in refineries, all to create a mood of strangeness and tension. But you might ask the question, and then you can judge them against the group that you've already got. And suddenly your style and detail choices become a lot easier. So here's another example. This is from Serena, completely different. It's 1929. It's the Smoky Mountains in Virginia. The story of Serena was set in a logging camp deep in the Smoky Mountains, and a logging community in Virginia. It couldn't be more specific. It demanded I actually went to the Smoky Mountains. I went to all the archives and the museums there to go and get all the archive research. And this is just some of the stuff that I got from the archives. And you can see how it informed the set design of the logging camp. But it's not just enough to copy what you find in the research. The story always has its own demands, and the characters too. So here, the couple was played, they were played by Brad Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence. They had a cabin of their own. He had a lot of money. It wasn't like a cabin that was going to be in a regular logging community. And mostly, the cabin itself, we use this kind of architecture, but this is where the set decoration became so important, because we had to show his wealth inside that cabin and the kinds of things that he would have had in the cabin. So, for instance, I mean, you saw the logging community things. It's pretty rough and ready. But then inside here, this is what the story demanded, because this is Brad Cooper's character. So we actually made that tabletop. And we experimented with a number of varnishes because I wanted to get the highest, most mirrored shine on that, just to give this sense of, of his wealth, even with a simple tabletop. It also reflected the light beautifully. So although the architecture was from the Smoky Mountains, and I was working with a Czech team, and they all became temporary experts in Smoky Mountains architecture for the project. So that's all very well, you might be asking, but what about science fiction? You can't go to an archive or look in a book for references of science fiction, right? Well, I think you sort of can. I would propose to you that all science fiction movies are period movies projected into the future. Recognize this from Blade Runner? 1980s Hong Kong, projected into the future. The original Batman, 1940s film noir, projected into the future. And in fact, I know that they use all sorts of research from, from Chicago and 1940s noir movies. Those of you who've seen Dune will recognize this. The sets in that movie were essentially 1970s brutalism projected into the future. So I think what we're talking about here, and this is really important for set design, is that set design is actually the development of an idea. It's making spaces real. It's taking 1970s buildings and turning them into a science fiction environment, and putting in the details that breathe all the life into the frame of the scenes. It's also where the set is made usable for the shooting team. It needs opportunity for lighting. So to understand the director of photography's craft is another area of expertise that set designers pick up on their journey. And in fact, my friend Don Walsh, who designs a lot of, he designs all of David Fincher's work right now, he always talks about a good set being like a Swiss cheese full of holes so that they can light it. But the set also needs access for camera, cranes, some of them can be quite big, and crew. So you can't just have one door to get in, because otherwise it's just a nightmare. And very often that's through movable or wild walls or panels. Here's a great example. If you've ever seen the movie Panic Room, David Fincher, funnily enough, but it wasn't Don Walsh who designed it. The entire movie takes place inside the house of the Jodie Foster character. And the designer, Arthur Max, built this house on stage over several floors, like a huge jigsaw, with endless wild walls and panels that came out that all had to go back seamlessly because Fincher wanted to create long, flowing shots through the space and create moments like this. So in this example, one of the burglars is tugging at the elevator door, and the elevator's coming down on the other side. So the camera is now between the walls, and the side of the elevator is open. And all of those panels then had to go back for another scene where you saw all of it back together. Just notice in this one the screen dimensions here. It's really wide. Fincher wanted to use this to create tension in all of the frames. In a frame that wide, you can see the threat and you can see the victim in the same frame. Now, screen dimensions is something that is also very important for set design because they will determine the proportion and shape of sets very often. And very often you design spaces that will fit screen dimensions, or you design spaces that will go in total opposition to the screen dimensions, so there will be a lot of black on either side. Either way, they both have their place in the visual storytelling that you're trying to create. So, just to finish off, let me show you an example of the process of set design in my own work. This is from Resident Evil. Long time ago, but it was, I think it's a good example. This is the glass corridor set. The script called for a concrete tunnel. thought that was kind of boring. Oh, by the way, although I said the script is the roadmap, it doesn't mean that you can't take another route on the map as long as you get to where you're going by a better route. So yeah, boring. So through the research process, I came up with a glass tunnel. Seemed perfect for lasers, right? So this was the initial concept for it. And I went to this with the set designers. They researched all the materials. It was a long drawn out process. There was materials, couldn't all just be glass and everything because that had its own issues. Building methods, auto tint. We used a lot of auto tint, and we had different transmissions because there was to get the mirror effect. I wanted to be able to see through the glass, but also to have a mirror effect on the inside, because outside the glass there were also mirrors. So that's how you got all these hundreds of reflections. So they researched all of this, everything, and they came up with what I think is one of the most iconic images of the film. I designed the costume for that too, but that's a different story. But that was something that got very much developed with the set designers at the time, and finally came up with this image. So I think there's so much still that we could talk about, but I think that covers most of the process of set design. I hope it's given you a window into what set design's about and a little about the process. But first, a disclaimer. I'm looking around, and some of you perhaps are thinking, this sounds like an interesting job, but I don't know about any of that stuff. Well, a confession. When I started out, after being in the theatre for a few years, I didn't know anything. Anything except that I knew I wanted to create sets for film. I could draw, but I couldn't draft. I knew nothing, seriously nothing, about architecture, construction, photography, period furniture, prop making, or much at all about filmmaking. But the wonderful thing about art direction is it puts you in touch with all of these things. And as I was saying, I touched on it before, but once you are working in the industry, you start to learn about these things very fast. And every project that you get onto sets you new challenges, and you learn from those new challenges, you take them on to the next, and you start to build on all of that. And for me, that journey started by learning to draw sets. I went off and got classes privately. I found someone who could teach me, and I had a drawing board set up in my bedroom where I was living, and I used to, in the evenings, I was busy drafting away. But then from becoming a set designer, there's all sorts of paths in the art department that are then possible. And there's one last thing I'd just like to leave you with. At the Art Directors Guild's Awards a few years ago, I was cornered on the red carpet by a journalist who said, "What advice would you give to any aspiring art directors out there?" And I gave her some dreadful waffle that I cringe to remember, but here's the answer I wish I'd given her. Become a sponge. Now it gets better. Really look at the world around you. Look at that building with the odd detail over there. Look at how the light falls in a room or a landscape. And how does it make you feel? And watch movies. Watch old ones, watch new ones. Go to art galleries. Buy photography books. Buy a camera. Learn how to use it. I did all of those things, because the more you stock your mind, the more you have to give to a set design. That, and also the world will never be a dull place again. Thank you very much.
How do you do your own breakdown? Do you feel like it's important to do your own script breakdown? Or how heavily do you depend on the breakdown that's been done by a script supervisor?
Once I'm on board, I then will read the script twice. I read it once, but just as a script, as a story. I don't get involved in the details. I let it move me. I let it take me where the script goes, and also you start to get a sense maybe of some of the shortcomings or things that you want to question about the script. And then the second pass, I get into the detail, and I'm reading it for the detail and the things that go on in a scene. And okay, this scene's an action scene. There's going to be a big fight here. And what kind of a fight is it? And who's doing it? And what sort of damage will that be and everything? Then after that, I sit down, and I'll be honest with you, it's a really tedious process, but it's so important to me that I can push through it really easily, because I basically go through the script, I write down the scene numbers, if there are any. Very often there's none on early drafts. I write down the place it happens, day or night, and I do a little blurb, just like an assistant director would do on a schedule, of what happens in that scene, just so it's like an aide-memoire. And initially, that's all I do. And that initial breakdown of what all the sets are, and I don't do one of those ones that repeats them going back to this set. I just want to know all the different sets that we're going to come through on this. Once you've got all of that, it's really extraordinary, because then you start to see a shape appear in the film, and what this is all about. And it gives you this wonderful kind of aerial view of the journey that the story is taking, just through those sets and everything. So I find that really, really useful. Then I'll read the script again, just to, and kind of get deeper into the details, and then take a deep breath, go back to my breakdown, and I do a much bigger breakdown, and I'll go through and I'll pull out like key props, key bits of set dressing that come up, or key things that are involved in the construction, and it's really anal. I mean, it's columns. But once I've done that, my head's completely in the film then. And I can refer to a scene, and I can remember what goes on, and I can also remember what all the props are, and and you've got an idea of kind of like key things, so that when you get crew starting up, you can say, listen, that there's this thing and it's going to take some development. I think you need to start that right away. And all of these different things. Also, crucially, reading the script a number of times like that gives you a sense, and that aerial view gives you a sense of where you think some of the key moments are in the script, which might be different to where the key images are, but it's really important to know those, and to know this is going off more into production design than set design, but also the key images. I've got a theory that when you go see a movie, you generally come out with about half a dozen images from the film. And, some of those will be very powerful. Some of those will be actor moments and everything. But if you can spot those in the script, those are the ones I zero in on to kind of design first, to sort of, because you want to create a frame around those and around those moments, or it might be a set where you go, I think that's going to be an absolute melting moment in the film, and actually focus on that to really develop it and everything. And then hopefully, like the old glass corridor there, I knew once I'd got past boring concrete tunnels, because I was, and once I'd got to the glass tunnel, I was like, oh, I think we're onto something. And it's really interesting, because you have to go with your feelings, just like you do when you're watching a movie. I get excited. I get really excited inside. And it's like, ooh, this will be really great. And and to be honest, that's the thing that drives you to, when you're designing a movie or doing the set design on a movie, is that sense of excitement about what you're creating. So that's my initial process, just with the script. In terms of what we've been talking about, which is set design, doesn't, it doesn't figure. It's when you sort of take up an HOD role like mine, being the designer, the DP, whatever, and you have to navigate personalities. But I don't find, I mean, there can be egos involved. I find the thing to understand about directors is, well, there's different kinds of directors, and there'll be directors who've got a really powerful vision of what they want to do. And in those instances, the important thing is to get on board with that director, find out what their vision is. You want to talk to them, and you want to pick their brains. And the best way of doing that is to kind of guess at where you think they're coming from, and show them images, and then until something sticks, or hopefully they all stick, and suddenly and then once you've got those images and you get an understanding of the style, you're generally off to the races, and then you just carry on riding the horse in the direction it's going. And then there's ways to, there are ways to subtly sort of guide the process in certain places. And also, one of this does apply to set design. One of the really nice things about set design is I love designing sets, because you always put viewpoints in sets, or I always do. It's like there are certain angles where I know the set should be viewed from, and when I've been visualizing the scene and the kind of set that's going to take place around it, there are a couple of key places where, which are the viewpoints. And you build the set, and then the director and the DP come on and they go, oh, that'll be a great frame. And you've designed that because you knew that was going to be great. And what you've done is just very silently shuffled them over there. And it's one of the fun things, where you're not kind of confronting people with, this is what you're going to shoot this at all. But you just create something that's so good they can't deny it. And so it's an interesting and fun part of the process. But and it can be challenging. But I think more often than not, if you're on board with a director's vision, or and then there are also directors who they don't have that vision, and you're there to provide it. But I think that at the end of the day, in both instances, what you come back to is story. It's always story, and it's storytelling. And you go back to the script, and you go back to the story that you're telling, and and if you're serving that story, you'll always come up with something that's right for for that scene, that whatever kind of director you're working with.
Just on a timeline point of view, when do you start your research, before production happens, or are you continuing to design when you are in pre-production? Just want to kind of get an idea of when you start on the job, and if you manage to do multiple projects at the same time, or was it just solely one project?
Never multiple projects. You couldn't. I mean, there's just too much to do on a movie. There's barely time to do everything on one movie, let alone on multiple ones. The research starts from the very beginning. So as soon as I'm hired on board, and these days very often. The research actually starts before, because, in order to get on board a movie, just like with directors and everything, I have to go in and pitch for a project, and I generally go in, I have to go in and show my take on the project. So I've already done a fair amount of research just to do that, because you'll read the script and get an idea of and if I'm interested in interviewing for it, then it means I've already gotten something from the script. So the research has sort of started there, and very often, if I then get the project and start on it, I'm building on a lot of the kind of initial research that from there. But it starts right from the beginning, and It depends. I mean, it just depends on the project and how much time you've got. But I will spend as much time as I can just doing picture research. You know, it might be a couple of weeks. I might go to a relevant place. You know, like I was saying, go to the Smoky Mountains or whatever, and you know, arrange trips like that. And then throughout the design process. So if it's a bigger project, like you know, the one that I'm working on at the moment, I will have a pre-production period, and that is when I would do my research and I'd start initial designs, and I also just start sketching. I mean, as soon as I, you know, and I'm collecting images and I have a sketchbook. I've got a couple of them filled up already on this project, but you know, I just do little thumbnail sketches of things, you know.
You mentioned interior design and architecture being essential skills in the set design space. Are there any skills, either technical or personality traits, that you find quite hard to come by or quite rare in the art department that you would like to see more people coming into the art department develop?
Technically, there are, I mean, more and more workflow is becoming digitized. And people who are multi-skilled, you know, but it, you know, again, it takes time and for people to kind of develop that. But you know, the more people are kind of multi-skilled, the more you know, the better they are at set design, and the more that they can bring to it. So you know, I mean, I'm currently working with some people who they can draw in SketchUp, they can draw in Rhino. I mean, these are really experienced people, so you know, it's not like they kind of walked in the door, you know, in their first day of doing films, like, you know, being able to do this. But they've learned to, you know, and then they've learned Rhino, and then they can do a little bit of 3D sculpting and everything. And it is that thing. It's a bit like learning languages. Once you've learned one kind of program and you become proficient at it, it's a lot easier to get into the other ones because, you know, or to move on to something else that you want to do. So that kind of multi-skilled thing is very good. It's quite hard to find 3D sculptors. You don't need them that often, but when you do want them, it can be hard to find them. Mainly because they all get snapped up in the gaming industry or in post-production. And there's an awful lot of people who, you know, who work in that environment and everything. So, but no, I mean, on the whole, it's, you know, we have the people we need, because it's one of the things about working in the arts department and being, you know, and being set designers and everything, is you become very flexible. And you know, and as people sense a need for certain things, they develop and they evolve, and they, you know, I mean, I myself have evolved because I grew up drawing stuff. When I painted, I had a brush in my hand, and these days, I learned to use Photoshop and to paint in Photoshop. Never look back. I love it. I mean, you know, couldn't do without it now. And I actually, you know, and I learned to do my own concepts. Not that I ever have time during a film production to do them, but in the early stages, or quite often, you know, if I'm not actually working on a film, I will be doing pitch presentations for directors, or you know, sometimes the studios sort of call you up and say, we want a presentation for, you know, something, and I'll do, you know, speed paintings for that kind of thing, along with images, in order to try and get the green light on a project. So you know, and all of us are the same way, you know, and it's you can't get stuck in your ways. You know, you get or you kind of get left behind after a while, I think.